I'm with Anya Pavelle today, and I'm really excited to talk to you, Anya, because I've known you for a good while now. I feel like creeping up on a year before when we
I
first
think
started
so.
chatting on Twitter and stuff. So it's nice to. That's one of my favorite things of this show is getting to know the writers I already know better, if that makes sense.
It does.
Um, so first, before we dive in, like no one's out of the woods yet with COVID, which is
Right.
not something I thought I would say a year ago today. Um, but we can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and like a lot of states in the US are like 70% vaccinated and stuff like
Mhm.
that. So what has lockdown life, COVID life been like for you creatively and as a writer?
Well, ironically, it's been good in a couple ways. So, Florida had a very short lockdown. I'll say there were still some limits, but no, they. When the pandemic started in March 2020ish, we I was working in learning support at a college, and we went remote for a couple months, and then last July 2020, we were told to come back,
Oh,
and so um I was not comfortable with that. So I had very bad anxiety, took mental health leave, and then things weren't so better. So I resigned, got remote teaching jobs. But it was actually a good thing as a writer because it forced me to look at my professional life. And I realized that the job I'd been doing for 5 years, it, I missed teaching my own classes.
mm,
So I was like, well, this is a perfect way to get some clarity. And being at home also gave me more time, and working part-time remotely, it gave me more time to work on my writing. And we had a very insular existence
mm.
because although Florida, opened a lot of stuff back up last summer, my husband and I did not go do those things.
Yeah, yeah.
We saw my mother-in-law, and she isolated. If we saw friends, it was either via Zoom, or they would come over and sit in our garage at the opposite end, and we'd have the garage door open. So it was very, we kept to ourselves. We had groceries delivered, all that stuff. And so as a writer, it was a very introspective time, which I think I allowed myself to get away from all these other things, all these other distractions. And it gave me the inner insight I think I needed to get some more things done.
Yeah.
And, also in my regular professional life, go back to doing something I really wanted to do. So um,
It was a bit of a
we
reset for you then, you could nearly say.
it was. Yeah, it was. And I don't like turning something bad into something positive because so many people suffered and
Of
whatnot.
course,
But
yeah.
it was also a chance to a month ago, I went to go visit my family after we had all been vaccinated. So, once we were fully vaccinated, we went to see other vaccinated people, drove 1,400 miles north over.
That's like the whole of Europe. Like I hear that, I'm like, oh God, she's practically in Russia at that point. Like,
Probably, actually, yeah, but it was over a few days, and I have family, that lives all the way up the eastern seaboard of the United States. So it was a good thing, and we still stayed safe, and but the states we were visiting actually had much better vaccination rate than the county I live in Florida.
wow, okay, yeah.
So we're still being very safe here.
That's good. One thing I think is interesting though about the COVID and everything, like as you said, yeah, I mean it's terrible. I mean, so many people lost their lives, and I'm not dismissing that. I'm just kind of more saying, look, for those of us that are on the other side of it now, we need to try and find the good before
Exactly.
before it affects you. Because I mean,
Right.
it's the one thing, no more than like world wars in the past. It's something globally that no country has how can I put it? Every country has an experience with it, so therefore every person has an experience with it. So
Right.
it's kind of a thing. If you have to look at the positive. So like getting that reset, that must have been, And are you happy? Are you happier now in your professional life with what you're doing now?
Yeah, I'm teaching in my field, and ones I've taught in previously remotely. And it was wonderful to get back into that because when I was working full-time learning support, I could pick up a class here and there.
Mm.
But juggling a 40-hour work week for the full-time job, plus additional class, plus additional writing, and then being present, with my husband and dog, my
Yeah.
immediate family. There's no way to do all of that effectively. So this reset allowed me to bring in more of the things that I wanted to do and that made me happy. And the job I gave up, I miss the people there, all of that. But that sometimes it's just time to move on. And there are these life events that, if you let them, will give you that clarity to say, okay, this is no longer the thing to do.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
like more
I
time.
know, yeah, I think, yeah, more time at home, more time doing what you want to do. I know that like um my boyfriend, I think I've said this to you before, he was very ill, like very, very ill a number of years ago. And
Yeah, I remember you telling me a little bit about that. Yeah.
yeah, and I remember the two of us, like when he kind of like the recovery was really weird. There was like three stages to it. There was like
Yeah.
recovery immediately in hospital, then there was the immediate recovery when he got home, and then there was the long-term like psychological recovery.
Right.
And it was just when we were in that third stage, we had this big chat about, well, like we had close, like he had a close call, and it was a kind of a thing of what's important to what's important to us as a family unit, what's important to him as an individual, what's important to me as an individual. And through that discussion, I ended up with this,
That's
like
awesome.
with my book.
It's not awesome your boyfriend was sick, but yeah.
I know, yeah, I know. It's so that's I guess that's my point of asking that question, is to try and you need to find a positive when there are negatives, because otherwise the negatives would drive you crazy.
Right. Agreed.
So then like we go, let's just kind of go back now, because I think that's a really good question to start with, because it gets us kind of gives us a bit of a preview of what your life is like now, so we can go back now and see how you got there. So like, what was tiny baby Anya like, and what was your, where'd you grow up, what was your family situation, that kind of thing?
So I was born outside of Boston, and my dad's an Eastern Orthodox priest. So I was born into a priest family.
Okay.
But then my father kind of didn't make friends at that parish. So my family moved to Wisconsin, because that was where there was an available posting. And it was really weird. We lived in then this town with 100 people, and then upgraded to a town with 800 people. And my parents also taught at a small college in the area. So when I was younger, I was very curious and creative, but also slightly obstinate. So not that I always have to get my way, but I'm very rebellious.
Not that I
And
always have to get my way, but did you always get your way?
no, I did not.
Oh,
No.
okay.
No, definitely not. And there was always a lot of religious conformity expected.
Okay.
And I bristled with that. And then when I was 10, my parents got divorced. Before that, we moved to Connecticut, where my dad's family is from. And then I spent, my middle school and high school years there. And that's where I was exploring a lot of creative options. I always did art. I wrote poetry a lot when I was growing up, and short stories with a lot of description, things like that. So I always had this creative bug, and whether that manifested as poetry, short stories, or art, then I always had something going like that. I didn't write any full-length novels or anything growing up. just short stories, small creative pieces, and things like that. And then I went to college for art and biology, medieval studies, art history over the next 15 years, doing various degrees and stuff. So hope I didn't go too far ahead there. But basically, when I was younger, I was very and on the way there too, I got kicked out of the church. So that was also a very formative thing, because when people tell me I'm supposed to do something religiously and I don't buy it, then I'm like, well, no, it's not going to happen. So basically I was creative, but also a little bit defiant and very driven in things I wanted to do.
Okay. And so then what do you have any siblings, out of curiosity, before we?
I do, yes. I have a sister, she's 2 years younger than me, a brother who's 5 years younger than me, and then a half brother. My mom remarried, and he's 23. So
Okay.
I'm almost 42. So there's a huge range between
Right.
my 23-year-old brother and I. Yeah, so I have three siblings.
Okay, so the two siblings that are, I don't want to say a full sibling, so that sounds mean,
The
half brother, but what
ones where we shared the same dad.
Sure, yeah, there we go. So the siblings where you have the same father, what's, just out of curiosity, what's their relationship with your old religion? Are they kind of in the same boat as you, or are they kind of on the fence, or are they still quite religious?
not they're both kind of they left as well. And it's not that it was a bad religion per se. It's just it was,
It just didn't fit you.
yeah. And so my brother became Episcopal because his wife is Episcopal, and my sister married a priest, divorced a priest recently, and is now having her own, kind of awesome awakening
Okay.
and thing. So, you know, so all of us have kind of, definitely drifted away from the very strict thing we had when we were growing up.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
none of us are still in there devoted this and that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I like for any regular listeners, you might recall the interview with Margaret Gilmedi. She also had a really strict kind of upbringing, and equally all her and her siblings and even cousins kind of sprung away from that and all ended up being very creative people. I mean, she does one woman shows and she
Yeah.
writes and she does also. So it's just really interesting because when anyone I've talked to on this show that said it had a strict upbringing, all seem to have ended up being on the show because they're creative people.
Yeah.
And like you said the word defiant earlier a little bit. Like it seems to almost be in defiance of that strict upbringing, almost like so.
To a certain extent, yeah.
Yeah. So like when you were young and like I'm talking elementary school young, I had to translate in my head. I was like, I nearly said primary school. I was like, no.
Yeah, primary school would be, yeah, like elementary-ish.
Elementary, yeah. Yeah, because it's weird because we have in Ireland we have only 2 schools, whereas there's 3. So like part of primary school is in early middle school, and then secondary school is so anyway, that's not the story. So when you were in elementary school and you were being really artistic and creative and all that, were you ever discouraged from that at all, which ended up making you wanted it more, or was it just other things in the religion you didn't particularly like?
No, it was my parents actually really encouraged, creative expression. So, I got art lessons. If I wanted to write something, I did that. So I think it was more so when it was just I didn't always like going to church every single Saturday night. I wanted to go out and do things with friends. And also it was just we had a priest come in who was very like hard, strict, but also very narcissistic. He later got defrocked for so this whole long, and I actually based my antagonist on him in the Moon Hunters, a cult leader. So I'm like, well, fuck you, dude. Here you go. So I'm going to take your stupid ass and make you a terrible character who gets killed by the end of the book.
That's like I've seen it said so many times, is like never piss off a writer because they'll kill you in their next book. So
yeah. Yeah. So, but I mean, I think it was just because, I've always believed in, that there's multiple ways to view life. If people are good to others, they treat others well, things like that, then that makes a good person. I don't believe I have to follow very strict. And plus I never agreed with the church's view on gay marriage and reproductive choice, things like that. So things like that. And then also the idea that if someone is Buddhist, they might not get into heaven because of, I'm like, no, that all of that ridiculousness is, I don't believe in feeling guilty every single day. I don't believe in forsaking my self-worth or my mental health because I'm supposed to suffer through this believing this type of thing.
Yeah.
So it was more so that type of dynamic that I rebelled against.
Yeah. I think as well though, that's there seems to be kind of a generational thing, because there's very few people like I'm 32 now, and there's very few people I know that's like your age and my age and all the in between that would be very religious. And even the religious ones that I know that would, for example, here in Ireland, even people that I work with would still go to mass every Sunday, but will still like believe in reproductive choice and would believe in the marriage. And so it's there's this weird kind of I think global religious shift, because so many churches, like in my experience, the only one I know of for definite is the things the Catholic Church have done internationally. Like there was that thing a couple of weeks ago about the residential school in Canada, and they found you know what I mean. So like there's loads of things like that, and I think globally there's this generational shift of, you know what, no, we're not gonna believe
Mhm.
everything you say anymore. We're gonna do what we believe is right.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
Uh,
I agree 100%. It's it's that type of it is that shift where it's believing in, rights for everybody.
yeah.
We're good. Little things like that that should be
Tiny.
I'm like, that should be the forefront of stuff. So
Yeah, like it's the most important things, and yet.
yeah. So yeah, I agree that it's a huge generational shift in things.
Yeah.
So, agreed.
Um, Speaking of huge shift, let's shift gears and talk about the next thing. Look at that for a segue. What about what kind of stories, like obviously maybe some religious stories might have struck a chord with you, or maybe not, but then outside of that, what kind of stories grabbed you as a kid and kind of
Hmm.
stuck with you, or that you still have a fondness for now as an adult?
I think that this is there was a story that I read when I was 7 years old called The Glass Mermaid. And it was about this girl who had this glass mermaid, and she went to go look at it on Christmas, and then she found these two elves trying to steal the glass mermaid and then go into this magical world through the base of the tree.
Oh, cool.
No, seriously, it was awesome. And that was when I was in my mermaid phase. No, seriously.
What do you mean when? I think you're still in your mermaid phase a little bit.
I think I am in the mermaid phase, yeah. um, but so that, hence that's a very impactful book. But I think part of it was that I like to believe that there's beauty and magic and things like that in the real world. And the idea that this mermaid ornament was going to be taken through the tree to be turned into a real mermaid. That was the whole premise of them stealing the
Oh,
ornament.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really sweet in a way, because it's
Yeah.
almost like the elves were like liberating this
Right.
poor mermaid, when he was just stuck as an ornament.
Yeah,
Uh,
because there's a lonely mermaid, and then there's this whole witch that is trying to thwart the plans. So I'm trying to remember all the dynamics of it, but yeah, it was creative. There was beauty, there was mermaids, there was the ocean, there was magical worlds, all these things. And so I think that was it made such an impact on me because in my writing I always try to bring in elements that are beyond what we see in the physical world, or just to give it some sense of the intangible.
mm. I think as well, like that particular story that you're talking about, the glass mermaid, the lonely mermaid, is very there's something I think is in every, we were talking about generational shifts, like I think there's something in nearly every generation in childhood books of a child stumbling across and finding something magical that was just hidden,
Exactly.
like the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Lucy Pensive, the name is stuck, the surname will come
Oh,
to me. What was it? Do you
oh,
know?
sorry, you were waiting for a second.
Oh, I thought you knew it. I was going to be so happy.
No, I was like, I don't know. Sorry, no. For a second, you thought you froze, and I'm like, oh no.
Oh,
What?
no. That was me actually freezing, because I was like, what's
Oh, okay.
happening? But that girl Lucy going back of the wardrobe and discovering Narnia, like Toy Story. I mean, what is that except the same kind of thing? So
Exactly.
it's just, I think every kid, no matter what era you look back on, is hoping to discover something magic, and when they do through books, it sticks with them.
Agreed.
You know.
Agreed.
Um, is there any other than stories, like, and when I say story, I don't just mean books, I mean like even films,
Mm.
TV shows, that kind of stuck with you, that you think maybe had affected you in any way, in terms of like how you are now and why you believe the things you believe, or whatever?
That's a good question. I mean, this is also kind of silly, but all the Lord of the Rings, just because it brings in the whole idea of of languages, and I do a lot of stuff with medieval literature, medieval art. So tapping into all of that lore was always had such an impact on me, and it's impacted me my writing a little bit as well. Like I bring in reference to a medieval legend or a medieval tale in the Moon Hunters and whatnot. But definitely the Lord of the Rings, and I'm trying to think of films. And of course, it'll probably come to me much later
Oh,
when
it's
I'm.
always the way. Like 9 out of 10 of the interviews I've done, I'll always get a message like, "Oh, I wish I said this thing," and it's just like, "Oh, well, don't worry."
Yeah, I liked some Disney stuff, but as I got to be 12 and 13 years old, I'm like, I'm too cool for Disney. So, um, I think maybe Beetlejuice, because
Really?
that kind of maybe preceded my very goth days. So, so yeah, that, the idea of the aesthetic that is darker, things like that. So probably, Tim Burton films.
Well, like Beetlejuice is there are bits in it that are quite gruesome and dark, like from if memory
Yeah.
serves me. I never, I can't remember ever watching it as a kid, but I remember watching it like years later as a kind of older teenager and being like, oh, this is not a kid's movie. Like it is, but it's not.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. And a lot of kids might not get parts of it, things like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, exactly. Like I can't remember the actress's name, but like even the fact that the people that have to work in the clerical offices, like the reason they have to work there, if you remember that, why they're there.
I don't.
Okay, well, it's just because of the way they died, and it's
Oh, okay.
yeah, like even that, like I know for a fact the first time I saw that, I was just like, oh, okay, I don't get it, and then years later, I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that's dark. Like that's really dark.
Yeah. And now that I think about it, definitely like Star Trek Next Generation, that was a huge thing too. Getting me interested.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Oh,
Science
okay.
fiction, that. And so yeah, my parents watched a lot of Star Trek. So, I watched it too. And it kind of, expanded my my interest. And again, if we look beyond Earth, what could there be? So it kind of tapped into my sense of wonder, I guess you could say.
Plus, because seeing as we said it earlier about that like whole thing of believing everyone should have rights, that it's a tiny thing, like that's key to the whole Star Trek ethos,
Agreed.
you know.
It is.
So that's probably a little bit of that in you as well for that reason.
Yeah,
Um,
it was very accepting of different perspectives, the prime directive, don't interfere, things like that.
but even now, I am out of all the nerdy, geeky
Mhm.
kind of fandoms, the Star Trek would be the one I know the least about.
Ah,
But I do know that a lot of people, when Next Generation came out, there's a so for those who know nothing about Star Trek, just in case, there's an alien race called the Klingons, and
yes.
in the original 60s series, the
Mhm.
Klingons were nearly always the bad guys, like almost always. They were just the villain race, and whenever they showed up, it was like the Daleks in Doctor Who. It was like, oh, there's going to be a, whatever. But then in Next Generation, there was apparently initial outrage that there was going to be a Klingon in the main cast
Mhm.
as a good guy who was like on the crew with them and part of so it's just, I think that's really interesting because it's that whole like, even shows like even within this utopian thing, they still had to progress and still give
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. My high school yearbook quote was actually in Klingon.
Was it?
It was.
Can you remember it?
Yeah. Kapla Hijol. I think success beat me up.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. That's something
I keep
special.
mispronouncing it because it's been a really long time. But yeah, it was in Klingon. And but you bring up an interesting point about how the 60s the Klingons are vilified, but then in Deep Space Nine, sorry. Oh, I need more coffee. But in Deep Space Nine, for a while, the Klingons and the Federation ally against the Dominion and all this others. I know way too much about this, but it shows there's a definite shifting of political alliances, shifting of things, which I think mirrors the physical or things on Earth. A
Yeah,
lot of
yeah,
things are rarely black and white. It's not that this side is always good, this side's always bad. It's a lot more nuanced and complex. And I think that as Star Trek evolved, it really showed a lot of that complexity. So I think that's good for people watching it because it lets them know, okay, don't just split and assign values.
yeah, exactly. Because I do know one thing, like even just to do with Gene Roddenberry, who's the guy who created Star Trek and everything, it was really important to him, this kind of equality across everything and all that. And like one thing I think it kind of, I often have to readjust in my head was that Star Trek and Martin Luther King, same decade. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? The
Oh yeah.
Stonewall riots and Star Trek, same decade. Like it's you know, it's because Star Trek is sci-fi and it's futuristic, and you know, people think like that. But Star Trek even had the very first American on-screen interracial kiss
Yeah. Yep.
between,
I
I
think it
can
was
get
Kirk and
this.
Uhura.
Yes,
Kirk and
yeah,
Uhura. Yeah.
yeah. So like even that, like I mean, it's one of
Yeah.
the things though, about equality and
Yep. And I think Star Trek Deep Space Nine too, they had, I could totally be wrong on this. They might have had the first on-screen um woman and woman kiss. That
really,
was in one of the episodes. But that's what I read somewhere. But I don't want to.
was Deep Space Nine after Next Generation or before?
What's after?
Oh, okay. Right, there you go. Sorry. Now this has really become a Star Trek podcast. Hi, everybody.
Sorry.
Instead of story of a storyteller, it's story of a Trekkie.
Yeah.
But hey, that's part of who you are, and that's the whole point of the show. Um, so then, did you ever write any Star Trek fanfic or anything like that, or did you ever never went down that route?
No, and it's not that I didn't want to. I think it was just that when I was really interested in it, I had so much other stuff going on. So it was just, and I think I was in the mood to kind of like consume that content instead of create it.
Yeah.
Because I was determined to, when I was watching all of these things in high school, I was like, all right, I want to go to college in Florida. I don't want to stay in Connecticut. So I'm going to get these scholarships. I'm going to plan this and plan this. And there, it was kind of my watching science fiction was kind of my way to decompress and
Okay.
to absorb content and, give me creative ideas. But I was more so channeling that creativity and the energy into the creation of other things. So it became a way for me to just enjoy and
Yeah, it was your switch
it.
off and chill out. Yeah,
Yeah.
which is really important. I mean, it's something I think a lot of us, especially people that create things now, like novels,
Yeah.
podcasts, etc. I think we kind of forget you do have to have something that just you can switch off
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
You know?
Telenovelas now.
Really? Wow. That's from one end of one spectrum to the other of the other.
Yeah.
What is it about telenovelas that drags you in?
It's just that the plotting is so extreme and hilarious. So it's think of the worst drama that is in this world and then magnify it times 11 million. And then there's that. So it's just it's like a guilty pleasure type of thing.
Yeah.
Lots of drama, lots of scandal, lots
Yeah.
of just hilarious stuff. So it's again, and I'm not going to write telenovela fan fiction or even a telenovela screenplay, but it becomes something that I can step out of and just again sit, enjoy, laugh at it, have fun. So
yeah, no, that's, as I said, that's important. So then if you weren't writing if you weren't writing Star Trek fanfic, were you ever writing when you were in high school, middle school, or was it all you were so driven to get to Florida to go to college that kind of all fell to the wayside?
I did a lot of poetry, and I was in this poetry competition where we had a chance to go to Ireland. If we
Oh really?
Well, I know, yeah. I got the first I made the first round where you're submitting the poetry, and then we had to go read because it was be reading this poetry in Ireland. And I had a very bad sinus infection. So I got up there and I was barking like a seal.
I mean, that could have been part of the poetry,
But yeah, no, and plus, honestly, if I'm looking at it honestly, the way I was reading it, even if I hadn't had the seal thing going on, it would have, I was not the best at the reading it aloud. I was very shy, and I just wasn't delivering it in a way that other people would. So in that case, I was like, all right, so it is what it is. But I really enjoyed poetry, sonnets, and I did some in some of my English classes, we would write short creative pieces, and I would do that. And I had, short story collection that I had going. And so I did a lot of writing. I didn't publish it anywhere. I entered the poetry competition, but I still have a lot of it. I look at it, I'm like, oh, that's not that great, but you know what? That's okay. It's
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. Well, you had to cut your writing teeth somewhere.
Exactly.
Like
Exactly.
when I was in secondary school, 14 to 19, 13 to 19 actually, I wrote a lot of short stories and a lot of like small little things. And I often just kind of there was a couple of years I had one secondary in secondary school, my English teacher would give us homework and it'd be like, write a letter to a politician complaining about such and such. That was the homework. And I come in like, Miss, I wrote this story instead. And she'd be like, great, do you want to read it there to the class? I'm like, yeah, okay. And it was, I used to think I was very well liked by my classmates because whenever I had a story, they're like, oh, great. And they'd sit back, and I thought they were into the story. And then I realized, because someone let it slip by accident, no, it was because it meant they didn't have to do any work in class.
You take what you can get.
I mean, I had a captive audience, so I would write for them. And yeah, and like I said, I think every writer, once they get published, there's always little stuff they did when they were teenagers in their early 20s, whatever, that they did that was never meant for anyone else's eyes, but still.
Oh yeah. Oh God, yeah. Yeah. And I started, writing something in my early 20s and it was crap.
Same, yeah.
And it's important to do it though. I mean, just to practice and get ideas out. And thankfully it never got published anywhere.
I don't see that.
Why so
when you were at that stage in your life, like kind of middle school, high school, and someone asked you, what would you like to be when you grow up? What would you have said? And the other way around, what do you think that age Anya would say about what you're doing now as a career?
So I think when I was in early middle school, like when I was 11-ish, 10, 11, I wanted to be an artist. But then when I hit 11, 12, I wanted to be a marine biologist. So I switched gears and, started preparing everything marine biology because I love the ocean. I did scuba diving and got certified to do that. And so then my mother was like, I wonder, could you ever combine, the art and biology love? And so, yeah. And so I started off college as a marine biology student. And I think so the other part of the question, if, Anya at that age could
see you now, would she be happy with how, like, well, not happy, but would she be like, oh wow, you're that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I think she'd be like, oh, that's an unexpected shift, but it makes sense. It tracks.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that's good because I always laugh when I ask that question sometimes because people will sometimes say, oh no, I wanted to be a firefighter, or oh no, I wanted to be an astronaut. And they're just like, no, they'd be very disappointed in me.
Well, when I was 6, I wanted to be a mermaid. And I had these neighbors sewed me a tail and I'd flop around to the lagoon.
No way, really?
Yeah.
Your neighbors just did that for you.
They were nice people. The lady was retired and she was sewing. So she sewed me a little tail.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Have you seen, this is totally irrelevant to the rest of the conversation. There's now a trend where there's like people who are professional mermaids.
Yeah.
Like that's bonkers. So this is a recent discovery for me. I don't know how much you know about it, but you want to maybe tell the listeners what that actually entails to be a professional?
Well, there's probably about 3 hours away from me. There's a place called Wekiwachi Springs, and they actually have mermaids put on the Little Mermaid underwater, and then they have glass around it so people can see it. So there's a lot of clear springs where the water gets filtered through the limestone, so it looks like blue crystal clear. And the mermaids will go into the spring, and then the people will sit and kind of watch the show, and they do it underwater. So I know that there are professional mermaids that go to this spring specifically to be mermaids. And I know that there are a couple of people, I think I've seen some on social media that they are professional mermaids, mer people. And, I'm like, if if they make money or just enjoy it, then I'm like,
Go
go
for
you.
it. Yeah. But
Yeah.
like, so they have these like amazingly beautiful, intricate, probably very heavy mermaid tails that they put on, and then they swim around, and like they train to be able to hold their breath for a really long time, and like it boggles the mind. There's just like like I never thought there'd be a job where, oh,
Yeah.
what can you imagine like meeting someone for the first time and you're chatting, it's like, what do you do? Oh, I'm a teacher and I'm an author and I have a podcast, right? What about you? I'm a professional mermaid. Like, I'm amazed and a little bit jealous.
Yeah, I know that's how I would be too. It's yeah, it's one of those things where it's a niche career, but if it obviously appeals
Yeah,
to,
yeah. I mean, like, let's put it this way: there'd be no such thing as that if there wasn't a demand for that.
right.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I think it's awesome.
So, what is it about writing, do you think, that kind of called to you when you were writing those poetry and those kind of stories? Like, what was it writing did for you then, and does writing still do that for you now?
Good question. I've always had a lot of creative energy,
Mm.
and I need to do something to release it by creating something. And if I don't do that, it really contributes to the sense of restlessness or anxiety, if that makes sense at all.
Mm.
So I was always trying to, I think when I was younger, it allowed me to express things I didn't know I was feeling. And it allowed me to channel my emotions into something, because if I had any emotional outbursts growing up, I had people telling me, no, control yourself, be mature. You're never going to get anywhere in life
Yeah.
if this happens. And so certain forms of expression like that were very much, like, get yourself under control. And, then it led to me, a lot of times crying in my room. Is you're trying to get these, emotions, this empathy, these feelings. And so writing, then it became, I don't want to say an escape, because that could be true in some cases, but I think it was more me taking all this energy, frustration, things I wanted to express, things I had the need to express, and giving it some type of tangible form. So that released a lot of the pressure on me. And occasionally I still feel like that now, but I think right now it's much more of a productive thing instead of a reactive thing. So I have these emotions, and sure, sometimes I'm anxious, I want to write, but a lot of times it's for the love of creating something.
Mm.
And that's much more pronounced now than it was when I was younger. I still felt that love of creating when I was younger, but I think it was also a way to cope. And
Yeah.
now it's sometimes a way to cope, but it's also, something that brings much more joy. And again, I do it more, for the purpose of doing it, for expressing myself because I want to.
Mm.
And it's not just something that I'm doing to make sure my life doesn't blow up.
Yeah. Um, we'll talk about your two novels, Moon Hunter and The Garden of Stone Houses, in a moment. But I just wondering, like, now when you write, is it mostly stuff you're creating for the public eye? Like, is it mostly novels, or do you ever still write the odd poem or a short story just to get something out?
Well, I think the novels, those are things that part of it is, part of it is still for me. And I also try
Oh
to
yeah,
definitely,
I think that's true for every writer, though, isn't it? Like, you're not going to write a book that you're not interested in.
yeah, I think I still do the occasional sonnet, things like that for me personally.
Mm.
But now it's becoming a lot more of, if I write something, I'm like, okay, sorry, more coffee. um, you know,
You got
I
water for yourself earlier. I think you should have got a coffee.
know I should have, but then again, I want to be able to sleep later tonight.
Yeah, that's also true.
So I'll think about that. But I think right now I still do some writing that's just for me, but more so I try to think of things I could turn into something that is for the public eye. I think because part of it is I have more confidence in what I'm doing now, and I've done it for a long time and developed certain things. So of course, I could put it out there and it'll get some criticism, people won't like it, and that's okay. But
Yeah.
I know that some people will like it, and you know, people will enjoy reading it. So
Yeah. And I mean, in a way, even like, 'cause I know this is true for me, and I'm not speaking for you, but I think I can, that even when you are writing novels that you know, even while you're writing them, that they are for the public eye, you still work out certain things within yourself through those that maybe you understand and you get as the author, but that the readers may or may not catch up on. Like even the fact that you mentioned there was that that priest that you based the villain of Moonhunters on, like even that, even though that was only one tiny thing in your head, you still got to purge that, I suppose, from.
exactly. And the main character in the Moonhunters, she gets exiled from her community, and so I channeled some of that stuff. Yeah, so there is definitely a lot of channeling. In the second book, Garden of Stone Houses, there's really not that element. There's not that purging thing that happened.
But I bet you though, if you did, if you sat back and read that as a reader, I guarantee you'd still find something to be like, oh, do you know what I mean? You
probably, yeah, it's just not as on the surface and apparent.
Yeah. So speaking of the Moon Hunter, I have two questions, so I'll answer them both at the same time. One, what was the spark? What was the initial that got you starting on the journey of writing that? But before you say that, could you just tell us what the Moon Hunters is about, like the kind of blurby thing?
Yeah, so the Moon Hunters is about, it takes place like 60 years or a little less than that in the future. And it's, a long time after a plague. I started writing this way before coronavirus.
Whoa.
And so, yeah, so this doctor, she's on a research ship in the Pacific Ocean. They're studying dolphins or something. And then she comes across two people in a small, what looks like Viking sailboat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. They're dressed in, antiquated looking clothing. They don't have any navigation stuff. And so she brings them on board thinking they're refugees from an island. And then she finds out that they've been isolated from the world since the start of the plague. And so the story is the unraveling of how those two people, a young man and a woman, got in that boat, how they got stranded, what have they been doing? And basically the story, then it kind of flashes back to the girl telling about how, she left an island that the rest of the world didn't know about. These people, right at the start of the plague, had sought refuge on the island from it. And there were 3 separate villages. One was set up by a cult leader who set up this really misogynistic society. And that's where the protagonist, the girl Alani, is from. And so she falls in love with someone from a different village. She has to escape her
original
home village, the misogynistic one, where the people rule this volcano god and take this sacred fruit, which is actually a drug that's used to control them. And then there's a tragedy, and then she and her her love interest, they have to leave the island and go seek help, and that's how they ended up in this boat, and then they're rescued.
Okay.
So that's the premise of that book. And then there's whole other family dynamics and drama.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. And so like, what was the initial spark then that got, what was, how can I put it, what was the seed that was planted in your head that grew and became the novel?
I think it was a combination of things. One, I'd read World War Z, and and then I was looking, I was like, oh, this is interesting. I got fascinated by how I think Cuba in that book did pretty well, because they isolated on the island. That was island where you could grow lots of things. It was a way,
an island nation. I kind of wish that worked out for Ireland and COVID, but hey, here we are. But anyway.
And so then, I'm wondering, like, okay, well, if people sought refuge, what would happen if there was a lot of conflict, and then I'm like, then I also love reading about cults and things like that. And then I found there was this really weird cult in Florida where people believed that, I don't know, the sun was a crystal or something like that. But anyway, wow. It was just a few weird thing. And then I also remembered that, like, the Scientologists, they have this big ship that, they go on. And, so I was like, interesting. So what if, a cult decided to, go to this island to escape a pandemic, with the initial idea of getting the ship, to live in international waters so they could live by their own rules type of thing, not, immediately buying the ship to get away from the pandemic. But I was like, well, what would happen if there were different types of, settlements on this island? When does a refuge turn into a prison? And, as someone who studies medieval history and all that stuff, I love looking at complicated political dynamics. And especially, when people are competing for resources, things like that. So how do humans, how do political systems, how do they set up, how do they work with one another? So then I thought it'd be very interesting. I'm like, okay, well, if these people went away to escape something, had their own, insular society for decades, would one of them have set up their own type of government system? How would they interact with other villages that might not have the same very strict values? And then what happens, how would they reintegrate into the modern world? Would some people want that, or would they be terrified?
Yeah.
So a lot of those things kind of played together. And then I'm like, all right, well, let's investigate this.
Do you know what? I kind of wish that oh God, his name's gone out of my head. Director and writer of The Sixth Sense.
M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah, thank you. I really wish that he had the same intelligence as you of putting that on an island as opposed to the middle of a forest.
Yeah.
Like I don't, like, for anyone who doesn't realize what I'm talking, there's a film called The Village from like very early 2000s, I think it was. Yeah, and it's not the same, obviously, but like there's a similar condition of what would happen if people's where they lived was isolated and that kind of thing. And
and I think that movie was in the back of my head too, because I love that movie, The Village.
Yeah.
So I think part of the thing was me reflecting on that too. Thank you for bringing that up, because I had forgotten that element.
Yeah, because it is like, it's so obvious now that you said it, like, put it on an island. Like, put it on an island, people can't escape right. Anyway, so how long did it take you to from when you have this idea, and on a side note as well, you mentioned World War Z. If anyone hasn't read it, read it. But if you haven't read it, and I'm saying this to you as well, Anya, listen to the audiobook of it. The audiobook of it is probably the best bit of fiction I've ever ingested.
Because Mr. Anya loves audiobooks, but he doesn't read, so I think he'd like that.
Oh, he loved this, because what's great, because World War Z is it's set 10 years after the end of a zombie apocalypse and how the world is covered, and this guy is hired essentially by the UN kind of to like document the world's history of it and all this. And so every chapter is essentially a separate short story that's completely isolated from the others, but you still do get a sense of how the zombie outbreak happened. But what's great about the audiobook is it's done like interviews, and it's totally different characters. Like, how each story is a separate, so like they have different actors, and it's extremely good. But anyway, back to you.
Please tell people about it, because it's a great book. I loved it. So I highly endorse people reading it. And the audio, now I know that the audiobook is really good too.
Like I had read it, and then I heard about the audiobook, and I listened to it, and I was like, oh wow. And I've listened to the audiobook more than once. But anyway, back to you, because you're the guest of honor, not Max L. Brooks. What about then, how long did it take you to write The Moon Hunters? Like, when did you first really start writing it, and when was publication day? Like, what was that gap?
Oh yeah, so that was a few years. I started writing it, and it probably took me, the initial draft, about a year to a year and 3 months to write. And then I started querying, and I some rejections, then I got feedback, and I revised, and then I found a publisher, Chandra Press, who published it. And even then we still had another 2 rounds of revisions. So it was published in, I think, 2019. I should double check that. I'm going to be the person.
I definitely, I know
what year the book. Yes, 2019.
There you go. Because I know there's people listening like, how does she not know what year her book? Trust me. When you're an author, these things blur into one another.
Honestly, the past year and a half has just been insane. Like, time has melted for me in some ways. So but yeah, it was a couple years. of, between starting to write, and I would write a little bit like on my lunch break at the job where I eventually left in the pandemic. And, I would write it there. That I had lots of revision because there were developmental things, and I got feedback because I had this big info dump at the beginning with all this backstory. And, it's a combination of flashbacks of journal entries from 50 years ago, this and that. So it was this very, to get the structure down was a lot of work between people who I worked with initially. And then I got, eventually I found my publisher, and then it was still more editing to get it ready for publication.
One thing I think is what do you think it is? Because we talked a lot about other apocalyptic fiction, and I mean, The Village is kind of you could kind of say it's kind of mini apocalyptic fiction, and there's so many movies like, I mean, what's it called, Mad Max, and we have so many zombie movies, and there's things like, the film 2012 and The Day After Tomorrow, and then your book. Why do you think there's so much human fascination with the apocalypse and the end times?
I think it appeals to like our sense of adventure or something, like, or kind of like how some people love to be scared during horror movies, like with ghosts and that type of thing. I like, I don't like super gory movies, but really scary ones with supernatural elements I love, because it's like you get the thrill of being scared without any of the with the consequences. So I think that's one reason why I love it, because again, I can, there's that thrill of the danger, the excitement, but it's from a distance, it's very safe. And so it's an interesting way to experience those emotions, but in a way that is not dangerous. And plus, I think sometimes when I'm in a mood where I'm like frustrated or something, or if I'm just having a bad day, I'm like, I want to watch something where spaceships are blowing up. Or I want to see the world swallowed by a tidal wave. It's just a way to like, to kind of vent those, things where, you could go to a bar and do axe throwing, instead of something, physical. They have the axe throwing bars and stuff. Yeah.
There's none in Ireland that I'm aware of, but I've seen them, and I'm like, how? What? Huh? Like in my head, I'm like, how is that a thing? How is that legally allowed? And then I'm like, oh, America.
Yeah. Great. The axes. So, I mean, I like to jog and stuff like that too. But I think it's good to kind
of sorry, axe throwing, jogging. It's such a difference. And yet they do the same thing. They purge those feelings you need to get out.
Right. It's a tangible way to get stuff out, And so I think sometimes, as humans, we get frustrated, we get angry, and then seeing CGI of things getting destroyed, it's a way to kind of just indulge in that negative energy, but in a cathartic way, and again without the damage or the risk. So I think it's okay to accept those types of emotions, because a lot of times people are like, if you feel bad, fix it or get rid of it immediately. But for me, I need to like, again, do something or see something that just kind of matches that fury. And again, it's, and also I'm very fascinated with how people deal in those situations. So I'm someone who, when COVID happens, or started to, I wasn't one of those hoarder people, but I got our hurricane supplies early. So a little bit at a place, no hoarding, but I'm like, okay, so if this happens, we're set here, we have this, so at least we organized and think about, what would happen in this situation? What would we do? And so I like watching survival shows. I like post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic media, because I get to see how some of that plays out. And I think my mind, which is a lot of times very analytical, it likes to play out those scenarios in case, I'm ever in one.
Because what would that be like? Imagine in the end days.
If the air conditioning goes out, I'm pissed. And the Wi-Fi goes out, I'm pissed. So, it would not be.
As long as those two stay, I think you can get through anything.
Well, I mean, I've actually thought about it. I'm like, okay, well, if there's a big flood, then we go to the second floor story. If we ever had to get away from people, we could block the stairs, because I learned about that in World War Z. Block the stairs, keep the upper story. Now, if you need to get out, then there's always the roof. Have an escape portal. So no, I mean, seriously, these are all things that, if we ever had to, and plus it's always good to have disaster supplies on hand, things like that, because
See, you're saying this as someone living in Florida.
I know.
To a guy who lives in Ireland, where like the temperature never gets too hot or too cold. We're just kind of always like, like it's called temperate, and really it should be called meh.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just, I'm like, because there's always the threat of like, well, what happens, if we have to evacuate or if we have to shelter in place. And, I'm not one of those people who the day before the hurricane comes or the day before a crisis is going to deal with it. Then I'm like, we're going to have it all set.
Yeah.
So that way we can be informed.
Because you were there saying earlier, like, oh yeah, I just got our hurricane supplies earlier. And in my head, I'm like, what? You're what? We don't even have like a windy day here closes the whole country down. And like you're probably like, what? That's not even category 6, or whatever. I don't know. But it's just so mad, like, to hear somebody so casually say, I got my hurricane supplies early.
Well, I mean, I went to college, did my undergraduate in Miami, and it was a few years after Hurricane Andrew came. So one of my roommates, she had lived through that, and Mr. Anya is from South Florida, so he's actually calmer about the whole thing. He's like, oh, we'll be fine. We have all this, and so he's in charge of the generator, getting the gas for the generator, and all that stuff. But it's just like, I don't know. And then in Wisconsin growing up, there were tornadoes all the time. So there were a lot of my formative years, hearing the siren, having to go into the basement. And, I don't like thinking about that type of thing, but I'm always, always like, well, what would happen if this happened? And it could just be because I'm a naturally anxious person.
But also, if you didn't have that, what would happen if this happened? You probably wouldn't be a writer.
True, exactly. So, and maybe that's, I like to, consume the post-apocalyptic stuff, because I'm like, oh, okay, that's actually a really good idea. What can we take from this? And then, the whole Capitol insurrection thing that happened on January 6th, I'm like, shit.
Oh, I was
like, I know, I was just like, I'm like, what in the hell?
Yeah.
And so
I remember the day that happened. That was bizarre as a European, someone on the other side of the ocean. I was actually playing a Dungeons and Dragons game on Zoom with my boyfriend and my friends, and we all were just we finished the game, and whenever we finish the game, we always stay on the Zoom and just chat and just hang out for like a couple of hours anyway. But I remember, like, literally we did that. We finished the game. Everyone was like, oh, okay, that was a really good game, whatever. And then I just looked at Twitter, and we're in a group chat together, and there was some things in that, and I was like, what? And I looked through tweets, and it was like I was seeing the end of the world. It was just this, like, not to be hyperbolic, but
no, I mean,
I was more like, this could be the start of a civil war. Like, this was huge.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think part of my, the whole thing about the post-apocalyptic thing too is like, once the orange one got elected, I was like, holy crap. I'm like, all right. So, and then, that whole thing happened. I just saw so much like hate and so much, all of that. And actually, Mr. Anya and I were just like casually looking. I'm like, do you think, since what would it cost to move to Ireland or somewhere, Canada? Like, could we both work remotely? Where could we take the dog? What could we do?
Yeah.
Well, maybe the British Virgin Islands. Let's do that. That's closer.
Just anywhere.
Like, do we know anyone that has a boat? No, I mean, but it's just like, I think that it's been such an unsettling time in so many ways that, creating the post-apocalyptic thing allows me to work. So maybe this is actually more of the writing as a therapy exercise. Is true. But
it's funny how the more you think about it, the more you can connect those dots, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So I think that it's just a natural fascination that people have with things ending. How would people behave? So
Yeah, yeah. Um, so then, like, what with your second book, The Garden of Stone Houses? I mean, that has a whole other side to you, like the whole kind of thing with tarot cards and voodoo and all that kind of a thing. So, what was the seed that started that book, let's say, and what's that book about too?
sure. So basically, I'll tell a little bit what it's about first, because then I think they'll give context for the seed maybe. It takes place mostly in 1860 New Orleans, and there's this young girl named Selene. When she's 6 years old, this happens in the 1840s. She sees these spirits come in through her window. She's playing with her dead father's tarot cards, and the spirits come talk to her and say that these cards belong to your father. You can talk to him through these cards. And meanwhile, her mother is in the next room getting fucked by this guy who's supporting them and putting them in a house. So the mother's like his mistress, and the mother and the girl Selene hate him. So, the little girl Selene, she wants to talk to her father. So she looks at these cards and, tries to do it. And then it flashes forwards years into the future where she's in her late teens. And she finds out that she's supposed to become the mistress to the son of her mother's mistress, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, so follow that line of reasoning. But then, she's like, well, Mom, what are you doing? And I was like, listen, you don't have to do anything, but, I have plans. I'm, trying to do these things. And so basically it's a way, Selene, she doesn't know how her father died. She doesn't know why her mother's with this man. And so the story, the book, is her unraveling this mystery of the past. And the mother comes from County Mayo, Ireland. I have her as an indentured servant that comes over. And so it's about negotiating revenge versus justice, about finding out about the past. And the girl Selene, she works with Marie Laveau, who's a famous voodoo queen.
Yes.
And the spirits she works with are also voodoo spirits. And so they help her in her quest to find out what happened and, what her mother's plans are, all of this. So it unravels. And so the reason that I think that sparked this was that my best friend for my birthday a couple years ago gave me these tarot cards, and I looked at it, and then I had the idea for this book just kind of crystallize on the way to work. And so at stoplights, I took a pen and I wrote notes for on my leg. I had a skirt.
On your actual leg?
Yeah, because no one could see it, but this was just at stoplights. It wasn't when I was actually driving.
Yeah.
And so, I had the idea, and then I kind of teased out like the idea of tarot cards as a communication device. Tarot cards as a way to figure out a past mystery. And then the story kind of follows what they call the major arcana, the journey from fool to the world. So it actually follows the tarot cards.
Oh, wow.
Because it actually follows that type of structure, follows the hero's journey type of thing, which again, mimics a lot of the Save the Cat structure. Yeah. So there's an inherent structure with the tarot cards. And I would give a little blurb about what those cards were, what they meant, and then there'd be a reflection of that in the story. Although I tried not to make the story like too rigidly follow.
Yeah, because But that's really cool. So basically, it was a birthday present that kind of let you down a path.
And I dedicated the book to my best friend then.
Oh, so, that's really good.
Yeah, because I told her, I'm like, you inspired this story, and I don't know where the rest of it really came from. It was much more sudden than the Moon Hunters, with that type of thing. So,
well, I found that too, because I found like for the longest night, it was a combination of things. Like it was literally, not a word of a lie, I put in a hat a list of like different things that I was just really passionate about or interested in, and then it was just the first three things that came out. That was the longest night. One being cults, one being Newgrange, and one being archaeology.
Awesome things, all of them.
Yeah, and they actually tied together really well. But then for my second book that I finished, the children's fantasy novel that I'm kind of editing and querying right now, it was like that. It was some of the kids in the school I teach in found out that I had written a book, and they were like, "Oh, can we read it?" And I was like, no.
No,
definitely not
for you.
No. And then they were like, "Are you going to write a kids book next?" And I was like, maybe. And the teacher of that class was like, Tell you what, guys, why don't you all design a cover for Connor's next book, and
Oh,
we'll see what happens. And that's what basically happened. Is there
that's
was
awesome.
I still have the one, and like the boy whose cover design inspired the book knows this, and he cannot wait, and he's refusing to read it. He wants it to go, I'll read it when you're published, because you're definitely going to get published. And I'm like, oh, I don't know, man. But yeah, so he designed this cover, and that it was just like straight away, I was like, I have a book in my head. Okay, let's go. It was
Yeah.
just, so
Yep.
it's funny how we both had that kind of thing where one
Yeah.
developed and one just appeared.
And I think that shows that, we learned something from the first book. All the mental gears that we're churning.
Very much so. Very.
The exercise of doing that first book. Now all those, cognitive structures and skills are in place. So, maybe not always, because sometimes stories take a while to get put together, but still, it's, you're like, oh, I know what to do with this, and then the confidence
Yeah.
to embrace that.
Yeah, I think even the confidence to know, well, I've done it before, so
Yeah.
let's go. And yeah, there are so many things you learn when you write your first book that you can fix, and I think that's why so many writers, they get their second book out so much quicker than their first.
Oh yeah. Oh
Like,
yeah.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. And actually, I wrote the second book while I was querying the first.
Oh,
And then,
really? Oh,
yeah,
wow.
and then because a lot of agents were saying, oh, the dystopian literature market is saturated. So I'm like, oh, okay, well, I'll start, writing
Now I'll
something.
go a completely different direction now. Yeah.
And then maybe that'll be a way to kind of like, find an agent, publisher, what have you. And so, but yeah, so then I had the first draft of the second book done before I placed,
Oh, wow.
Moon Hunters. And then after the Moon Hunters got published, I was like, hey, so I have this thing.
Yeah, let's go round 2.
And so then I wrote the sequel to the Moon Hunters. I'm editing that. And so, that was also a quicker process
Yeah, that's
than the
right.
first book.
Anya, we're nearly out of time, so
Okay.
I always love to ask the same couple of questions at the end. So my first question is, when we're done here, we stop recording, we have a little chat after and say goodbyes, what's the first thing you're going to do
When we chat or after we hang up?
after we hang up?
Okay. I'll probably sign into the writing community chat show.
I knew you were going to say that.
You did. Yeah. And then after that, I'm gonna bake a quiche, and it's my dog's birthday today. She's 6. So we're gonna have my mother-in-law over for dinner, and we're baking her little doggy quiche. We have doggy ice cream. And so I know it's like I'm planning my dog's birthday dinner after the writing community chat show. And then I have to take her out for a walk, in between thunderstorms. So so
that sounds like a jam-packed afternoon.
yeah, maybe it'll be fun. We're gonna make it special for her, and then
That's sweet. We never actually celebrate my dog's birthday, and maybe we should.
I mean, if it's something she would like, or even I don't even think our dog knows what's happening.
No, but still. So then my next question is, where can people find you and all your books and everything like that online?
Sure. You can if you go to anyapavelle.com, ANYAPAVELLE.com, just making sure I spell that properly. I have links to the books on there, and you could also find them on Amazon. And I know that my publisher is Chandra Press, CHANDRA Press, PRESS.
Yeah.
They should have a link as well. People can follow me on Twitter. The handle's at Anya Pavelle, and that's the social media platform where I'm most active. I also do some Instagram stuff, but I have to work up my engagement. I'm not on TikTok yet because I don't know how the hell to do that, but
I don't either. I work on it and things happen, but sometimes I'm like, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, so I have to think about that, but you can definitely, I mean, Amazon's probably the easiest place to find them. So I would recommend going there, and then or on my website, you can sign up for a newsletter, which I haven't sent out in a year and a half or more. But I have a blog I haven't updated for a year and a half because I didn't want to ramble about.
I will say to anybody listening, though, one thing that I think, Anya, that you do really well is if you tweet something and ask for a particular style of book you'd like to read, Anya will be on top of that and be like, here's books I've read that you will like. So even for that, I think people should go follow you, because you're so good and gracious and kind to promote other authors' books and not just your own all the time.
Well, Halo Scott inspired me on that because she does a lot of recommendations too.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
and Kelly Miller. So,
Yeah, but it's important. Yeah.
what a people who are, but yeah, if anyone ever, I'm on Goodreads too, and I have a lot of books that I've reviewed on there and write about. So if you want to, I love historical fiction, science fiction, fantasy, and other things. So if
And
you're,
books just in general.
oh yeah, I mean, I like some popular chick lit and memoirs, a whole range of things. I like to read a lot of different stuff, thrillers.
Yeah.
Depends on my mood. So, if you want to read about different books, then, follow
Good.
me on Goodreads and whatnot.
Excellent. And then my last question is, what was the last book you read?
Ooh. Let
Or
me
even the
think.
book you're reading now, if you can't remember the last one you read.
Yeah. So, oh gosh, sometimes I read 5 books at the same time. So,
I
oh God.
cannot do that. I cannot do that.
Yeah. I sometimes read between like 2 and 7 books at a time, just jumping from a lot of them because, oh boy. Okay. This is, oh my gosh. Okay. Yes, I know the one. Ross Young's Get Ted Dead. I just finished and reviewed it recently. That's one where it's the most like, it's really good. If you like Good Omens, if you like, dry, snarky British humor, you will love this book. It's great. I was
He is
cracking up
very
all the time.
dry and snarky.
Oh yeah, and it's if you like that type of humor, then this book is just like amazing. So yeah, that's what I was trying to think of. But I was also reading the historical fiction about Cuba. Chanel Clean's really good for that. So if you want, stories that focus on historical Cuba and the Cuban diaspora to Miami or Palm Beach, there you
Basically,
go.
if you like books, Anya's got you covered. That's all you need to take away from this, guys. Anya, thank you so much for doing this. It's been great to have you on. And as I said, it's been great to actually finally get to talk to you and get to know you.
Likewise, Connor.